the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site, covering the Arizona Cardinals. And on the line with me is Seth Cox, RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the SB Nation Arizona Cardinals site. Seth is, this is the fun show because the Cardinals did something. It's episode 390. We have a new general manager, and the coaching search is on. This is, and we don't even, this, normally we're talking about the roster. We're not even talking about the roster yet. We're probably not going to talk about the roster for a couple of weeks because we might have a head coaching decision in the next week or so. And then we can talk about the coach, and then we can talk about the roster. And so it's given us content for weeks. Isn't that right, Seth?
Yeah, and it's going to be fun, man. We've got a new general manager, and that means that you and I don't have to get to know Trent Simpson or Drew Sanders as a potential top 5 pick, a tweener off ball linebacker, pass rusher kind of guy. We can get to know different types of players and be surprised and enjoy the process as it plays out over this year. And you know, it's definitely going to be fun because it's going to be a brand new learning experience for us, which is always enjoyable. But I think also it's going to be a test in patience because you and I were talking about it a little bit off the air. I don't think, and they do have, a little bit of cap space heading into this year, but they've got about 2 years of dead money still that they really can't do anything with, that until they're really going to be looked at as the Monti Ossenfort Arizona Cardinals and not the final iteration of the Steve Keim Arizona Cardinals.
Exactly, that's the part. So here we now, if you haven't caught the news yet, you should have at this point. The Cardinals hired former Tennessee Titans Director of Player Personnel, Monti Ossenfort, as their new general manager. He was introduced to the media on Tuesday, and that's when we're recording is Tuesday night. And it's, wow, this is all sorts of fun, but this is basically a new sort of era, cycle, what you want to call it, for the Cardinals, because aside from Buddy Ryan, and I don't even really count him exactly because he was a head coach as well, this is the first external hire that the Cardinals have made a general manager since Buddy Ryan in 1993. And then before that, you have to go back to the at least before Larry Wilson. I didn't do that much research into it, but we're talking 50 years. We're talking 40, 50 years, and the Cardinals, who had 2 in-house qualified candidates to become general managers, they passed them over for Monti Ossenfort. We're going to start talking about this edition of the show. This show, we're talking about Ossenfort, everything around him, and then we're going to talk about the coaching search as well. What were your initial reactions to the news that he was the guy?
I think the first reaction was kind of surprising. Not that they went outside of the organization, just that they made the call on Ossenfort so quickly, which makes you wonder, because the Tennessee Titans hired Rand Carthon, another candidate the Cardinals had requested to speak with. They may have even interviewed him. We don't really get those details that often. And so you wonder if they knew that Carthon had decided to go with the Titans. And so they were like, look, Monty's our guy. We're not going to drag our feet at this point. Like, that's my first reaction, is because it just, not that the hire came out of left field, but like them hiring a GM in general just came out of left field, kind of like that it materialized overnight, especially on a holiday, like right after there was a wild card game that evening. They were coming off Super Wild Card weekend. It's a national, federal holiday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, the Cardinals are hiring Monti Ossenfort to be their next general manager, and you're like, what? Like, I wasn't ready for this. Hold on, give me a couple minutes to.
Yeah, that was like whoa, wait, whoa, and well,
You're like, you're like, I thought I was gonna have a quiet day off. I
yes.
didn't know I was gonna have to work out at my second job.
That was it. What it did fell out of left field, and of all the guys they interviewed, I thought Ossenfort, just on the names, I thought Ossenfort was probably the least likely to be there. So let's kind of look at the candidates that they had. Now, it turns out that they interviewed 7 guys. I think they said, and 3 of them were internal. They interviewed Quentin Harris and Adrian Wilson. We knew that. They also interviewed Matt Harris, who's also within the organization. Ian Cunningham, Jerry Reese, and then what's his name? Ian Ortiz of the Ravens.
Yeah.
And so it ended up being they didn't end up interviewing Carthon. They requested it, and then the Adam Peters, the 49ers guy, he turned down the interview request. So they never actually got to interview Carthon, which is interesting. But of those names, because, you had Jerry Reese, who had been a general manager before, had built a championship team. I was a little bit excited about that one. Ortiz was, comes from the Ravens organization.
I was going to say he's part of the Ravens machine, so
Yeah.
a lot of people were excited about that possibility because he's a disciple of a really, really well run organization.
Yeah, and then you have Cunningham, who was by all accounts around the league is kind of an up and coming star within executives. He was in the accelerator program. Bid will talk to him there, and so it felt like that. Just kind of looking at those guys now, I when we talked about the candidates last week that we knew about, including Ossenfort, his history was very intriguing because of his background, in a decade and a half with the New England Patriots, and he worked his way from scout all the way up to director of college scouting for the Patriots when they were in their dynasty mode with Tom Brady and everything.
Yeah, he was the director of college scouting for their final 3 Super Bowls. Like he was the guy that was helping Belichick create the boards, that was helping Belichick make these decisions. And people want to say, well, Bill did everything. Well, yeah, Bill was the GM, but he was the guy.
But he's not the chief evaluator.
Right. Like he was the guy that was giving Bill the scouting reports. And somebody, said to me, like, they're one of the worst drafting teams of the last 20 years. You guys worry too much about first round picks. What you don't notice, and what Ossenfort did, was he built an incredible offensive line through the draft for the New England Patriots. Their offensive line, his final 2 years there, was almost all homegrown talent that he was the responsible party for drafting. And he was just a guy that put these guys in a position to be successful. And it's a baffling sentiment to me to be like, well, the Patriots miss on all their first round picks. Okay. If they miss on some of their first round picks, let's not use hyperbole. Yes, they may not draft all pros with their first round picks, but you look at it. I mean, we both talked about it, but I wrote about it. Like, they drafted Joe Thuney, one of the best guards in the NFL, I think in the 6th round is what
third round
right.
in 2016. Okay. I just pulled up their draft history to
Yeah,
You kind of look
and
at that.
they drafted Isaiah Wynn, who's a really good player. They drafted Shaq Mason, who's a really good player. 4th-round pick. Can you imagine a 4th-round pick that starts over 100 games at guard?
We thought Earl Watford was a good 4th-round pick, and he was a backup. I mean, nothing against Earl Watford, but
we love Earl, but Shaq Mason's a legitimate, well-respected, highly paid guard in the NFL, playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Like, this is a guy that started 115 games in his career, and got a huge deal from the New England or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this offseason. Ted Karras is a 6th. That's who the 6th-rounder was. Ted Karras is one of the better centers in the NFL, or guards in the NFL. Starts. Oh no, he is the center for the Cincinnati Bengals. That's what I thought. He's snapping to Joe Burrow. He's one of the best centers in the NFL. A 6th-round pick. He started 65 games in his career, and he's a really, a 2-time Super Bowl starter. Not a guy that was on 2 Super Bowl teams, like a 2-time Super Bowl starter. Like, this is a guy that can play. And
yeah. Well, and you look at some of the other, even the guys that you don't remember. Marcus Cannon in 2011 was a 5th-round pick. They drafted. They drafted 2 tackles that year. Nate Solder was their 1st-round pick. You go to, correct me if I'm wrong, Connor McDermott. Is he the guy that got all the crap from the Cowboys last year in 2021?
No, I think that was. I thought that was Connor Williams.
That might be it. But some of the other names that we come, Brian Stork, the center that they had for a while, was drafted in the 4th round. You go up the line, you got Shaq Mason, Trey Jackson, you got Ted Karras. I think that's a 6th-rounder. Joe Thuney. So yeah, you've got a whole bunch of these guys.
Well, and then they do it on the other side too. I mean, you talk about, like, he was part of the crew that drafted Lawrence Guy out of ASU. That's been a stalwart for their defense forever. He drafted Trey Flowers, who's been a really good pro in the NFL. He drafted Derek Rivers, who's been a good pro in the NFL. Dietrich Wise, Chase Winovich. Like, these guys are all. Byron Coward's one of their starters on their defensive line now. Like,
5th-round pick in 2019.
So, like, that's what he has been able to do. And so the other thing that you notice with this, and something that you and I have talked about, is, like, he values premium positions. And so you look at it, he's drafted corners early. He's drafted, interior pass rushing defensive linemen early. He's, things. And people are like, well, Dominic Easley was a bust. Okay. He took a flyer on a guy that had a knee issue that just didn't pan out. Malcolm Brown was a bust. Okay. He went to the well to go get a defensive lineman. Like,
well,
yes,
and
the player,
but mind you, these are also picks 29 and 32 and
right. And so, yeah, so people are like, well, he misses on these guys, and it's like, but he took a swing. Like, that's been the biggest thing. I went back, like, in 5 years in his 7 years since he became the director of scouting in with the Patriots. He took 12 offensive or defensive linemen in the first 3 rounds. In the decade of Keim, he only did that 10 times. So, like, in 5 years, you're talking about 12. In a decade, you're talking about 10. Like, he values the trenches. Now, again, you can be like, I don't agree, those guys didn't work out. Okay, that's fine. But at least he's taking hacks at those guys, and he's not spending. I mean, that's what I wrote about. Like, this is the Cardinals used 12 top 3 round picks on wide receivers, tight ends, and off-ball linebackers in a decade. Like that's just not good roster and draft utilization. And by the way, they missed on a lot of those guys.
Yes,
So.
yes. We've been talking about Kaiman as picks for some time, and yes. And so this is something different. It'll be fun to see. But he comes like you see the organizations that he's been running or that he's helped contribute to. You have the Patriots in their heyday. Then you have the Tennessee Titans for the last 3 years, and while they don't have much to show for it in the playoffs, but what have we seen from the Titans is the fact that they are consistently good. They're consistently near or at the top of their division, and that's and you granted that when you've got a guy like Derrick Henry, hard-nosed, tough football is what they play. So it's going to be interesting to see how they build the roster now moving forward, right?
Well, yeah, that's going to be the thing because they don't have a Monti Ossenfort type of roster. And that's not to take any shots at any of these guys or anything like that, but they lack young, physical offensive linemen and defensive linemen. That's just not what they have. And so that's what you saw with Ossenfort as the guy, director of scouting. That's what you saw with him as the director of player personnel in Tennessee. So, is that going to continue? I would guess it would. And when you're drafting 3rd overall, especially in this draft where there's a legitimate chance that the first 2 picks are quarterbacks, you're really first team on the board in terms of like, hey, we can take anybody. And so that's going to be fascinating to me because I know for me what I would do, but I'm really interested to see what Ossenfort's thought process is. The other thing is both the Titans and the Patriots love to trade down and get more picks and have more bites of the apple, so to speak. But again, that's usually trading down from the late or the early 20s or
the 20s or 30s. And so that's when you want, because your premium blue chip talent's usually gone by then. And so you usually find the sweet spot of talented, capable players who can be very helpful. And those are guys you want more of, especially since the talent gap in some drafts from 20 to 45 is negligible.
Right. And so that'll be what's interesting to see what his thought process is around all of that, because that's going to be, you don't want to say his first draft is going to be what defines him, but his first decisions are going to be what defines him because, and again, we're going to have plenty of time to talk about the number 3 pick, but if you make the wrong pick, if that's your first, decision, and you say you take Jalen Carter and Will Anderson turns into a two-time defensive player of the year, and Jalen Carter's just a really good player, it's going to be like, what were you thinking? Or you trade down and you go get a very good guard in Peter Skoronski. But again, Will Anderson or Jalen Carter.
It's the 2006 draft all over again, or 2002 draft all over again when they passed up on Suggs to get Calvin Pace and Bryant Johnson.
Right, and so that's what's going to be interesting because we're going to be able to debate it and have our opinion and what you and I being wrong, right or wrong, isn't going to matter. Right? It won't matter, but it's going to set the tone for a lot of fans for Ossenfort's career, because you don't want the first decision you make to be the one that people are like, he's the guy that passed on, blank. And so,
well, let me recall, Steve Keim's first pick was Jonathan Cooper.
Well,
so we're like, he's building the trenches.
Well, and so that's always, and somebody asked me this. Do you think that made him gun shy to like go back to that well? Like he was like, God, that was such a monumental bust that like I can't have that happen again. I need to be cautious with, how I deploy this pick now. And it's like, dude, you still got to address the issues of this offensive line. Like they're not going anywhere. They're still there.
Yeah.
So, whether or not you had bad luck, and that's, I mean, honestly, we probably could chalk a lot of that up just to bad luck for Keim and Cooper. You gotta get back to it too, and really, change that. But I'm really interested to see. It's going to be fun. Like I said, like I don't know who my pick was to be the GM. Like I had less opinion on the GM candidates just because it's not like we were coming from the well of like, oh, we can get, John Lynch, or we we can get like all of these guys are guys that are up and coming. So you're just realistically, you're just looking at it and going, I want them to get a guy that comes from an organization with a strong identity. And
Yeah.
that is what
ultimately
they
it's what
bring.
they did. They absolutely did do that. As we talk about moving forward. So let's move on from that. Coming in next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about specifically what Ossenfort and Bidwill said and what was said at his introductory press conference. That's coming on next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. He was introduced to the media on Tuesday. The big press room, not just the regular media room, but it was the auditorium, and he had a lot to say. And of all the things is that, didn't you kind of get a vibe that the Cardinals kind of are trying to model the Patriot way in terms of philosophy, and even kind of they talked about a Cardinal way, but we know that Bidwill is. I believe Bidwill is fairly close with the Kraft family, with Robert Kraft, and how they do things there. And I believe he's trying to, if lack for anything else, Bidwill's trying something different this time, which I respect, because it would be easy to continue to do these things because you've got a young stud in the organization, and Adrian Wilson, who is a legend, was kind of on track to do kind of the Larry Wilson career, where he goes from Larry Wilson from Hall of Famer to general manager. Adrian Wilson, who is arguably a borderline Hall of Famer, a Hall of really, really good, and then moving his way quickly up in the organization to be kind of a right-hand guy, to be right there on the precipice of being a general manager. So it would have been an easy thing to do, especially with the relationship that he's had with the organization. But instead, they do it this way. And so, didn't it feel like they're trying to model something different than what they've done in the past?
Yeah, and like you kind of opened with, it's been 30 years since they went outside. And let's be honest, and it still could happen, we'll get to that, but the flirtation with Sean Payton was closer to what happened in 93 than
yes,
going after Monti Ossenfort.
Yes, the Payton thing, yeah, it felt like, now granted, Sean Payton has a better resume than Buddy Ryan did.
Yes,
is a much bent, but temperament better, better performance as a head coach, less some controversy. But it was, to me, it was kind of the same mold, somewhere between Buddy Ryan and Denny Green is kind of how that was, which could certainly work. I mean, his success in New Orleans is unprecedented. They had never had any sort of, like, the New Orleans Saints were terrible until Sean Payton and haven't been very good and weren't very good this year. So basically every bit of success the Saints have had in their franchise has come from Sean Payton. But yeah, so it feels like that they're turning a page, but I want to focus on what the things that he said. And I want to start with this is the money quote that everyone across the internet was quoting. And so it was national reporters took that quote, took that soundbite and posted on Twitter. That is what I did. I think every media outlet that covered anything with the Cardinals and the general manager hire took this one. It said, ego will not be tolerated in this organization. What is that a big deal to what you said, but what you think, what he said, and what do you think that means in terms of how the roster is, especially considering the reputation around Kyler Murray?
Yeah, I think it just is one of those situations where, they're going to put a lot on these guys, and the ego has to get out of the way. And so if you think you're bigger than what they're trying to build, then it's not going to work. And that is kind of the basics of the Patriots way, right? The Patriot way, so to speak, is that nobody's bigger than the team. Nobody's bigger than the organization. And the ego has to go out of the way. And if you're not willing to or able to do that, then you can't be a part of this. And I think that's just a opening salvo towards everybody. Like, hey, listen, this is the expectation now. This is what we want. And this is what we're going with. And you either get on board now, or, I'm not going to say they're going to ship them out, but you will be gone. Like, this is not something that we're going to play around with. This is a very serious thing.
Right. I will say that this is not unlike the message that basically every leader of every organization does. Checking your ego at the door. Steve Keim talked about leaving your ego at the door when he talked about the behind closed doors meetings as an organization when it came to talent evaluation. This is not unlike really any other organization. Ego will not be tolerated. It was an interesting thing because I take this as someone that deals with language. I think that ego is different than talking about egos, because every talented player all of them have egos, but that's different than talking about that ego will not be tolerated in this organization. We're not talking about that's not saying that they're not going to draft players that have personal egos. What this is saying is that ego in general, meaning even if a player, say like a Kyler Murray, thinks highly of himself, or these diva type receivers, but if their main focus is winning and not personal gain, then that's kind of what you want to do. And this is what he said later, and what he means by ego will not be tolerated. There is one goal here. It's to win. There's no putting personal interests in front of the team. I was told once the definition of mental toughness is putting the team in front of something that maybe would have been better personal for me. To me, that's the type of players that we're looking for. And so some people suggested that perhaps that they will be willing to take lesser talented players as a result, and perhaps that's the case. No, they still want talented players. They want talented players that put team first. It's not like they're just going to have, and not to disparage Jesse Luketta's talent. They're not going to go and draft a Jesse Luketta in the first round because he's a team first guy. It means they would draft him in the 7th round over another highly athletic because of that mentality.
Well, and it's so funny because everybody immediately, gravitates towards, I wonder if this is about Kyler.
Right.
But what if it's about DeAndre Hopkins?
That is very, very valid. If there's one thing we know about Kyler, whatever there is about Kyler and what's said about him, if there's one message that he's made very clear, And that has to do with his play, any conflict of his. He wants to win. He wants to win. That's the goal. He wants to win. He doesn't care how it looks. Does he try to do things differently than maybe what the coaches want him to do because he wants to win? Yes. But that's not the ego. It's like he's not looking. Kyler isn't looking to throw for 5,000 yards. His goal is not pass for 5,000 yards, have 50 touchdowns. His goal is to win. Period.
Right. And so that's, but that's the interesting thing is that's how, everybody always wants to put everything on Kyler, but that's part of the gig too, right? As the franchise, when you get, that's part of what comes with getting paid that type of money those are the little things that you have to deal with that a lot of people don't get. Like those are things that come with the price tag. And here's what I'll say. There's a lot of guys, right or wrong, that care about a gold jacket more than they care about a Super Bowl ring. And the reason that is because there is, and I don't know how many people know this, there are personal financial gains that come with a gold jacket as well. What I mean by that is your retirement goes up, right? Like, so your retirement benefits go up. You're a Hall of Famer, you get a little extra cash, not just cachet, but cash, right?
It's interesting is that fact, and that's a question that's asked of a few people, and I understand. It's like which would you rather have if you had to choose a Super Bowl championship or Hall of Fame? Personally, I would say, but there's the motivation. I would say Hall of Fame because what does almost every Hall of Fame player have?
Right, there's a ring, yeah.
They have championships. So picking one isn't picking one over the other. It's just the focus becomes I'm going to win and I'm going to do what I need to do to help my team win, and as a result, I'm going to thrive and turn into that. Or you say, hey, I want to have the best career possible. I can want to be legendary, and by being legendary, what will that lead to with my teams? That'll lead to winning. So, but yeah, you're trying to get players that put a value on winning first. And
right. And so that's kind of where they're at right now. And so I get it, man. Like, people have a very sour taste in their mouth from this year, and that includes everybody. And you and I running sites, we see the fans' comments and their beliefs in what is going on. But the reality is, there's, like you said, most of these guys only care about one thing, and that's winning. They just want to win. They just want to be able to have a chance to get the brass ring one time, and that's a big deal. And I think that just gets overlooked because there are so many guys that look at it as like, this is for me, this is about me. And you and I have talked about this before. We always 100% side with the players in terms of contract stuff, because we understand that it's super short. Their opportunity to make that kind of money is fleeting.
And yeah, it can disappear in a moment.
And so that's the thing is, like, fans want everybody to be loyal to a fault, but there's also the reality of, like, not everybody can be Tom Brady and married to a woman that makes $400 million, right? Like, and so he can afford to now divorce from, but he can afford to at the time to be like, oh yeah, I'll take a discount ish type of deal. And so that's the thing is, you want guys that want to win over everything else. And I think to your point, that's what they're talking about. Like leave the let's worry about the gold jackets at the door. Let's worry about getting that ring. And then once that happens, there's a really good chance, right, that you'll get that gold jacket.
Absolutely. Something else that he said when talking about the third overall pick, he says, "I hope we don't pick third overall again." That's for one. The benefit is we're going to be ready to pick a premium player that's going to come in and have an impact on our team. That's the benefit. The other benefit is there could be calls on that pick. We're going to operate at every step along the way. We're going to do what's best for the team. So if we get the chance to drop back and pick up additional picks that will help the team, help build the team, we're going to entertain that. We're in a great position. I would say the same for every pick of that round. There's going to be action. The phone rings in the draft. The phone will ring. We'll be ready to take a good player, and we'll be ready to listen to offers too. So we're in great position with that pick. You know, he said nothing there. And that's going to be something that's different because, as we mentioned, he's not been in a position to draft top 5. That's something that's going to be new. And well, interesting is kind of is if the Cardinals end up moving on for DeAndre Hopkins, say if they're able to get a first-round pick for him, I don't know if that's going to be possible, from a team that picks later in the first round, that then becomes interesting. Because if they were to acquire another first-round pick, I bet they hold set at number 3, but then use the later pick to then trade back and pick up more picks. That would be my guess, but
and that would be 1,000%, right? That'd be the Patriot way.
Yes. Because the Patriot way would not be drafting third overall. They're not quite there yet. So Patriot way is consistent playoffs. So you're picking in the 20s or 30s every single year. He didn't have much to say about Kyler Murray, other than, he's got to get healthy first and foremost, and that he did say that in terms of a head coach, that they weren't looking for a head coach that'll work with Kyler. They're looking for a head coach that can lead the entire organization. That completely makes sense, and obviously can lead the entire organization, can develop players, and Kyler is a part of that. And a kind of what this tells us, I think there's one thing I can take away from that, is that the next head coach does not have to be an offensive guy. You can get a guy that doesn't necessarily, isn't Kyler's favorite, but so we'll talk about a little bit Brian Flores. Not everyone's cup of tea. But if you got the right guy on the staff that will help and motivate Kyler, you've got to do what's best for the organization. The Cardinals made offense like Kliff Kingsbury when they hired him with a young quarterback in Josh Rosen at the time. They felt that it was critical that they give their quarterback play calling consistency. So they wanted someone who could develop a quarterback and could develop him in an offensive system. This is different. So you want someone to lead the organization, and Kyler's a part of that, but he's not the most important part of that, because who you get to lead the team isn't necessarily the one who necessarily has to develop Kyler.
Right. And it's something we've talked about, right? That a lot of these guys, and Dable's getting credit, for Jones, and he's getting, Bills fans are lamenting his absence now from Allen. And there is something to it, right? That there are guys that are really good, but there's also the reality that these guys have to understand and that it's a different NFL, and a lot of it comes down to what work are you putting in on your own, enabled, in a way to get to the next level or grow your game or whatever it may be. And so, to your point, like, are they going to be able to get a guy that, not maybe that isn't for Kyler, but is willing to push Kyler and make sure that he's going to the right people, that he's working in a different way, and doing things to improve his game continually and not, not just stay set in his ways or where he's at right now.
It was interesting because he did not he did talk about what he's learned from previous teams. So he's got processes that he believes in. And one of the things that's most interesting about a general manager when you have a front office so you've already got a scouting department is that you're coming in and now in January when the scouting department has been led by a group of players, been led by Steve Keim. That's kind of the direction they're taking, the entire college football system, the college football season. And now you're 3 months away from the draft. He has to come in now, Ossenfort has to come in and work with what they have. And I'm interested in, and he's in the evaluation process, but it's going to be interesting to see how much changes and how much he's going to, so when he comes in, he puts in his processes for evaluating players, how much that will challenge the scouts that they have, the directors, and how many of these guys ultimately will stick around.
Well, and it's one of the things you and I talked about off the air. I'm not going to say guaranteed, but they're going to be here for this process and this draft, and then they'll probably not be, because that's how most teams do it. Is they let even though it's a new GM, they let the scouting department finish things out, and then he brings in fresh eyes, fresh ears, fresh ideas after this. And so he'll lean on the guys that he has, but you got to remember this is a guy that's deep in it already. So
he already has a number of opinions built up, but that is interesting because from a business standpoint, like even if he wanted to bring his guys in from the Titans or the Patriots or whatever, because of the work they've already done belongs to the Patriots, they couldn't bring their evaluations with them. That's proprietary information. They wouldn't be able to do that, and so they would have to remember what they said and wrote about them, and kind of go from there. So yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens in May. How much of the organization stays? How much of that? Well, I'm very intrigued about what is the future of Quentin Harris and Adrian Wilson. Harris has been with the organization forever. Adrian Wilson has been with the organization forever, and now Quentin Harris has been overlooked. So Quentin Harris interviewed last year. He interviewed with the Titans. He interviewed with the Cardinals this year. He was passed over again. Adrian Wilson got passed over in this cycle. How long do they stick around now that there's a brand new general manager when it felt that they were being prepared potentially to be the team's next general manager, which ideally won't happen for another, 10 to 15 years, right?
Hell, I mean, he's young enough. You could talk 15, 20 years, ideally. I mean, and so that's going to be interesting because the other thing is, to your point, is he going to want to retain them? Like, it's definitely a two-way street on this. It's not just will they come back to the Cardinals. Will Ossenfort want his own director of player personnel, his own director of college scouting? Like, will he want to bring in guys that were under him, like you said, in Tennessee or in New England, to be those guys? Or is this one of these edicts that he came in with that they say, hey, this is the expectation as well. We're expecting you to keep Quentin and Adrian on your staff at these positions, because at the end of the day, let's be honest, that is what we're waiting to see is how the Arizona Cardinals allow Monti Ossenfort to create his staff, his management and his team, and what he wants to see moving forward.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We're going to move on to the talk of the coaches. We've got a couple of new candidates, and then we'll talk about more. Next up is Frank Reich. That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the Star of Cardinals talk on the web. We didn't know exactly who the targets would be when we last recorded. Last week,
because we didn't have a GM yet. Now
correct.
Now we got a boss man.
That we knew of 4 candidates that the Cardinals were targeting by the end of last week. That was, of course, Vance Joseph. That was D'Amico Ryans, 49ers defensive coordinator. It was Brian Flores, former head coach of the Miami Dolphins, and also Sean Payton, who we spoke much about. However, the first reported interview that happens was not any of those 4. Now, Vance Joseph is scheduled to interview on Wednesday. That is, we knew that was going to happen. That was always going to be on the table, but he's scheduled to interview on Wednesday. But the actual first interview that came up, actually, a day after Ossenfort is hired as general manager, Frank Reich, former head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, was the very first interview that they conducted, which, when we talked about the Sean Paytons, and Frank Reich is, for me, if you're talking about a head coach, is the one I'm most intrigued about, perhaps. Maybe a little bit less so now because of the general manager hiring. But it was interesting to see. It was a little bit of surprise, especially since on this show, I felt Frank Reich would have been a great fit in 2019 or even 2018 when the Cardinals went. Because didn't Reich get hired in 2018? Is that correct? Yes, he got hired in 2018. Yes. And so in 2018, when they hired Wilkes, they didn't consider Reich. And Reich was the guy that I felt was being overlooked because people talked about John DeFilippo and this and that. When you're like, but Frank Reich has been the guy. He's coached quarterbacks. He's been an offensive coordinator and a play caller. He comes from that Eagles team that won the Super Bowl. He was the guy that I thought would have been the one. And now after several years with the Colts, 2 playoff appearances, a 40-33-1 record from 2018 to 2022. He's the first interview. I liked him as a candidate, but I was surprised that of all the names, that one, like, wait, he was the first guy they interviewed, especially when we know that there are connections with Ossenfort and Brian Flores, who was with the Patriots organization forever, and then the betting odds seem to suggest that Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator for the Titans, now becomes a favorite, even though his name hasn't come up. What were your thoughts on the breaking news of Reich interviewing, and 2, what do you think of Reich as a candidate? I personally like him, although the one thing I don't like is that it gives us a kind of a vibe of Adam Gase, who had failed. You look at, fizzled out as his last job. He's just been recently fired, but you're going to hire him right back because he was performing poorly at his job. And now you're going to hire him. That's the only perception, the only perceived thing that I don't like about it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just let me ask you this. What is your opinion, maybe not in terms of play caller, but what's your opinion on the difference between Reich and Kingsbury as like a head coach?
Well,
I mean, do they seem, and I'm not going to say they're the same coaching style, but they both seem very laid back, right? Like,
yes.
And so you wonder.
And I did feel that some of the issues that he had in Indianapolis were kind of like Kingsbury's, where a lot of them were out of his control.
Yeah.
But
yeah, definitely.
He does have a more rich NFL background. He was on the Ken Whisenhunt coaching staff back in 2012 as a receivers coach. He coached quarterbacks in Los Angeles. He was an offensive coordinator there. He was a quarterbacks coach under Ken Whisenhunt when Whisenhunt went to Tennessee to coach. he became the offensive coordinator for the Chargers. And then he became the offensive coordinator for the Eagles under Andy Reid. They won a Super Bowl, and then he got the head coaching job. And you know, he had to deal with the Andrew Luck retirement fallout. So he got to coach guys like Jacoby Brissett. He had success with Phillip Rivers. He got a washed-up Matt Ryan. But he's had success with a number of quarterbacks. So he'd coached Phillip Rivers before. He coached Carson Wentz when he was at his best. So, but yeah, I think the one thing that's different is the longevity in the NFL and sort of the offensive scheme that he comes through, because his comes from his offensive background ultimately comes from the Coryell offense, I believe.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see. The question I have with Reich is, and I'm going to go look because I honestly don't remember off the top of my head, is what's his coaching, like who's he going to bring in on defense? Because you were talking to me about this. Wouldn't it be a little disconcerting if they were like, hey, we'll just run Vance Joseph back if we hire Frank Reich?
Yeah, but it would. Yeah, it would. There's definitely pros and cons to that. One, he represents kind of the problems that they have. They weren't good defensively last year. Like statistically, they weren't good. But it would allow some of your players, some of your core defensive players that you want to have around, like a Budda Baker, Jalen Thompson, Isaiah Simmons. If you bring back Zach Allen, Marcus Golden, your young pass rushers, it would allow them to not have to all learn a new defensive scheme, develop and to kind of be in place that way, so you don't have a complete overhaul on both sides of the ball, but at the same time, they weren't good. But Vance Joseph is also highly respected in that locker room. He's highly respected in the league. And it isn't uncommon for a head coach to come in and to inherit some coordinators. Vance Joseph was given a 2-year extension last offseason, so if they were to let him go, they'd have to eat that final year of his contract. Like Mike McDaniel, especially if you're going with a guy who hasn't been a head coach. So some of the names that are going to come up are not yet have been head coaches. And like Mike McDaniel over in the Dolphins, much of his defensive staff was holdovers from the Brian Flores coaching staff. And so it is a fairly common occurrence.
Yeah, and so that'll be the interesting thing, because his staff in Indy for those years were really, really good. Nick Sirianni, obviously the head coach for the Eagles, and Matt Eberflus, the coach for the Chicago Bears. But they also have Jonathan Gannon, who's the DC and getting looks right now, right, as the defensive coordinator for the Eagles and getting some head coaching interviews. So he seems to have a pretty good pipeline in the NFL, which is always important, right? When you go from Reich, I think the next interview is going to be the kid from Denver, right?
Well, that's the next guy we'll kind of talk about. So yeah, let's talk about that. Coming next on the Rise Up Seared podcast, special Cardinals Talk on the web. We have another candidate that emerged, no interview scheduled yet, but requested, and that's Ejiro Evero, defensive coordinator of the Denver Broncos. That's coming next on Rise Up Seared. We're back on the Rise of Seared podcast, special Cardinals Talk on the web. So Vance Joseph is technically the next interview up for the Cardinals with the head coaching staff, but then late on Tuesday there was breaking news. There was a report of a requested interview. And Ejiro Evero, defensive coordinator of the Denver Broncos, part of Nathaniel Hackett's staff, is getting looks around the league. The Cardinals have requested an interview with him. First-year defensive coordinator, very talented one very high-performing defense this year for the Broncos. They were ranked number 7 overall in total defense. in that, sort of disaster of a year. Interesting candidate. He's familiar with the NFC West because he was part of Jim Harbaugh's defensive staff. Well, defensive and offensive staff. He's got history on both sides of the ball. Then after Harbaugh, he went to the Rams. So he's been with the Packers, he's been with the Buccaneers as a quality control coach, but then he kind of moved his way up as being part of the Sean McVay staff, coached defensive backs, coached safeties, and then became defensive coordinator with Nathaniel Hackett over in Denver. Evero, in terms of, if you look at how he's moved around, he feels a lot like Vance Joseph and Steve Wilkes, and who was the coach for the Chargers before Staley. I forget his name every single time.
Anthony Lynn.
Anthony Lynn. So he feels like Evero is a name that, to me, follows the same career arc as those other head coaches, Steve Wilkes, Vance Joseph, Anthony Lynn, none of which you kind of feel like were great head coaching situations, would you say?
Yeah, and it's always tough with young guys that haven't done it yet to figure out exactly where they fit in, right? Like how they're going to fit in. Now, like you said, he was with, all right, so going back. So he's been with Harbaugh. Who was Harbaugh's DC? No, well, I guess he was an offensive. I guess he was an offensive assistant at that point.
He did the offense too, but yeah.
But so that was So he was with Fangio. Okay, so he was with Fangio. He was with Dom Capers. So he's had some really, impressive mentors.
Yeah.
He's with Wade Phillips.
So it would maintain that 3-4 base that they did run.
Yeah, and then obviously Brandon Staley before Staley went to the and Raheem Morris, which, by the way, I was going to ask you this: is it weird that Morris isn't getting more run, but Evero is?
I know Raheem just interviewed with the Broncos, I believe. But Raheem Morris is, Evero is that young up and coming, which teams to get the attention, and Raheem Morris has kind of been there, done that guy.
Yeah, and so it'll be interesting because the worry with those guys, and this includes, like, we can throw D'Amico Ryans in there. We can throw who's the kid from that you just said from Tennessee, Shane Bowen. Who are you going to be able to get on your staff? Like,
right.
You've been under great names, but you haven't developed guys yet. Like, you've got 1 year as a DC. So who are you?
Like Vance Joseph, 1 year as a DC, wasn't a great head coach. Steve Wilkes, 1 year as a DC.
Well, yeah. and you look at, to your point, like, you look at Wilkes, right? So Wilkes brought his buddy Al Holcomb to be the defense coordinator, and we know that was kind of a like pseudo name only.
That was the Bruce Arians equivalent of Harold Goodwin being offensive coordinator.
Right. So Al Holcomb, they bring in Larry Foote, or was Foote already?
Foote was already on staff. Okay. They retained him on staff.
And so then you look at Al Holcomb, and this is, let me say it this way: this is how you can tell if they were a good coach or not. Wilkes gets fired. Obviously, Holcomb goes as well. He hasn't got another coordinator gig. And the reason why is because it just, like, he wasn't ready yet. He wasn't, or he is just a really good positional coach, linebackers coach, running game, defensive running game coordinator. Like, he's not a great DC. And that's what the worry would be with an Evero, is that you're going to get something similar. So, like, obviously I'm not familiar with the depths of the Denver coaching staff right now, in terms of who's there. But when you look at that, um, where would, who is Evero going to be able to bring with him? Like, and then the other thing is, who on earth would be the OC that they would bring in?
That's always the question. While, like, we were mentioning Vance Joseph. Is like, if they hired a guy like Frank Reich, he brings his offensive staff. But if they retained Vance Joseph one more year, that means you've got half a dozen coaches whose salaries you don't have to eat or buy out, because you can let Vance keep his defensive staff with him and kind of maintain that. While what's going to happen is, if you bring in a defensive guy, they're going to bring in their defensive guys, and then you're going to have a new offense, because whatever offense is coming in is not the Kliff Kingsbury offense, and is likely not going to have the same staff as, well, that, and half the offensive staff was fired during the season too.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this all works out with a guy like Evero, obviously. And it was something. Did you see Jim Trotter's tweet the other day?
Was that about the chart situation?
No, the defensive coaches, the coaches that are defensive coordinators interviewing for head coaching jobs, are now presenting not just who their offensive coordinator would be, but who would be the next offensive coordinator in that succession if that one was to get poached.
That's an interesting. Yeah, that's. You kind of have to think about that, because that was one of the things when the Cardinals hired Kingsbury, was the notion that, hey, because offense is important, if you have an offensive coordinator who is talented, he's going to get plucked away. And so you kind of do have to have a succession plan in place.
Yeah, so it's the, so you wonder, and he didn't say who, but he just said with talking with some head coaching candidates. So you wonder if he's got some connections with the AFC West, especially the Chargers. So would it be talking about Evero? Would he be talking about potentially Raheem Morris, right? Because he's in the LA area, those guys, or is he talking about a guy like Brian Flores, that's a defensive guy, but has a little more cachet in the league, so to speak. So it's interesting to see how they're approaching this now, because like you said, a defensive guy, it's a lot harder to sell.
Yeah, and unless you get, would be, kind of interesting would be, hire a Brian Flores, have Frank Reich as your OC.
Yeah, and you wonder if, I would guess that they're.
I wonder if they broached that topic with Reich in the interview.
Well, I was gonna say, I wonder if it's almost. I guess they probably wouldn't be scheduling Evero, but like, I wonder if they're looking at it as they are potentially like. Do you think Evero could be the DC, or is he gonna like? That just made me think about that.
It might be like, it might be like a double interview type scenario.
So like, because that's what I was gonna say. What if they're like, hey, we're gonna hire Brian Flores, and so like you're saying, like, and Flores is like, hey, these are the guys I want to bring in for interviews. I'm just spitballing off of your take on Reich, but that would all make a lot of sense too.
Yeah,
like, because now all of a sudden you're gonna grab Flores, because let's be honest, while they have requested permission to speak to Sean Payton, they haven't set anything up.
There isn't any scheduled interview yet.
Right.
At least, so the only interviews we know that have been actually scheduled was the one that already took place with Frank Reich, and the one that is scheduled to take place Wednesday with Vance Joseph, which will have already taken place by the time you listen to this episode. But yeah, coming on, go for it.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so maybe that's what this is all about, is that you're looking at, maybe they have said like, hey, Flores, you're our guy. We're going to give Vance a chance to interview for his DC job, but we're also going to bring in other. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but it would be an interesting.
Like you're letting them bake their pitch as head coach, but then say, "Hey, would you?" Like, and kind of make it a dual interview. If you're not the guy, would you be willing to be a coordinator? Interesting. But yeah, coming up next on the Rise Up Secret podcast, Special Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's talk about the last segment of the show, which is Sean Payton and the rest of the field and the coaching candidates. We'll talk about them, what we think about them. That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, Special Cardinals Talk on the Web. Sean Payton is still the name that everyone wants to see, but it feels like it's kind of losing steam for a number of reasons. One, because now you have a guy who's going to be the clear GM. Payton probably is seeking more personnel control. There's cost, and then there's some whispers that maybe the Carolina Panthers are getting ready to throw everything at Payton, which would be an interesting turn of events with what's happening there. It would, which would be fun, because then it would allow him to be back. Oh, that would be interesting, because the same division, what would be the cost to compensate the Saints for him to be in the same division? But doesn't it feel like the hiring of Ossenfort seemed to, at least in terms of a football point of view, in terms of a fan point of view, kind of take the wind out of the sails of the Sean Payton talk, even though the betting odds changed things only slightly from plus 300 to plus 350?
Yeah, I don't know if it changed anything other than, they're telling Sean in this instance, like, hey, we'll definitely allow you to maybe be, a guy that is in charge of some personnel decisions, but you're still you're not going to be the head coach and GM. Like, you're not going to be Bill Belichick. So that's the only thing. And so they got it out of the way quickly and said, like, hey, if this is what you want, then don't expect that, right? Don't expect it. But if you want to come here still with and be the coach, you're definitely going to be part of the personnel package and everything, decision making package. But it's not just the Sean Payton show. I can see that. I'm not going to say it rules him out, but I do think it changes things, because we've heard, and it sounds like Dave Tepper's willing, that Sean wants to kind of be the guy. And not only does he want to be the guy, he wants to be paid like the guy. Like, we're hearing just
right, $20 million a year. Woo.
Oh, somebody that covers the Panthers said that they heard that Tepper would be willing to do $25 million a year.
Holy cow! And from what Sean Payton said in an interview is that the Saints are probably looking to a mid to late first round pick as compensation. That's now that would be different because the Cardinals obviously have the number 3 pick. The Saints don't. The Saints.
And I've told you before too. I really think that's, hey, if Sean wants to go in the division, we're not going to give it up lightly, right? Like, we're not going to give it up easy. And here's the thing, though, dude. Like, the Panthers pick 9th. I mean, I like Sean Payton. If you told me, hey, we'll take, and again, I gotta look just so we'll take 67 this year and your first round pick next year. Okay. I'd think about that a lot quicker than I would say, hey, we want the number 3 overall pick. I'd be like, good luck
Yeah.
in your search. Like that's how I would. But if you're going to go within your division, I I could see it, man. I really could.
Yeah, yeah. We've already talked about the pros and cons of a guy like Sean Payton. It just feels like that seems to be less likely. That said, the other two candidates, Brian Flores and D'Amico Ryans, are intriguing. The Flores one now seems to be kind of the favorite in the room. Just looking at kind of connecting the dots, let's say, and unless like Shane Bowen suddenly becomes a candidate and request to interview him. Brian Flores, who interviewed with the Cardinals in 2018, impressed them. He impressed them. He got 2 interviews, so he was one of the finalists for the job before they went with Steve Wilkes. He went to Miami, had some success. Obviously, there were something like his last season there wasn't good, and there were question marks about how he handled the quarterback situation. But as a leader, he's got connections with, because he was with the Patriots organization from 2004 to 2018, and so there's already a connection there with Ossenfort, who was there with the Patriots from basically 2003 to 2019. He does kind of swing the pendulum the other way when it comes to accountability. Flores he coaches hard. He demands accountability. He is the anti Kliff Kingsbury in that sense. So he seems to be kind of the pick right now, and I'm not against it. But then it becomes the question is, so what are you doing about offense?
Yeah, and some names that have been tied to him that are interesting. The first one I saw,
Bill O'Brien?
Yeah,
No, that would be something.
Was Bill O'Brien. That would be super interesting, right? Strong personality, right? So you don't get Bill O'Brien. Would you? And I don't even know if they have any. I don't know if they have any overlap, but like LaFleur, the kid that just got let go,
Mike LaFleur that just got canned by the Jets.
Yeah. Would that interest you?
Maybe. I don't know. There's so many names. Like then Joe Lombardi was just fired by the Chargers.
Do you think? And I don't even know if they have any overlap together. Like, do you think like Todd Monken would come back to the NFL? Or do you think he's just going to hang out with Georgia for the rest of his life? Because it's
a pretty good gig there.
I was going to say because
that's a pretty good gig.
Because he's killing it, and it's. I don't want to say it's easy. I'm not trying to take anything away from what he's doing, but like it's not working in the NFL.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Or will Ossenfort go the route that Keim did when he hired his last 2 coaches and basically handpick the opposite coordinator? Mike McCoy was handpicked for Steve Keim for Steve Wilkes, and then Vance Joseph was handpicked for Kliff Kingsbury. So that would quite be so. The names for offensive coordinator when he's in Miami, George Godsey and Eric Studesville. Then I know nothing about those guys.
Yeah, there's some guy named Chad O'Shea who's the wide receivers passing game coordinator from Cleveland. I mean, he was there initially, 2020 it was Chan Gailey. Ugh. So, and then 21 is there. It was Godsey and Seville. Um, it's interesting because he's on the staff with the Steelers now, but you go to the Patriots and if we're looking, Patriots way and everything like that, like O'Shea was the wide receivers coach in um, New England. So, he's a guy that's been there for a while. You've got, I'm just kind of looking through.
Unless you went Jim Caldwell, although Mike Jurecki is saying he's not looking for anything other than head coaching jobs. I haven't seen Jim Caldwell's name come up for anything for head coaching jobs. But Brian Flores, like in 2018, Jim Caldwell was going to be the guy with him. So I wonder if that would be, if he would then, rejoin him as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting to look at that and everything. I'm trying to find the Steelers coaching staff this year and see who he'd have any connections.
You've got Matt Canada is their OC.
And then Steelers.
Mike Sullivan coaches quarterbacks.
Nobody that like stands out. Yeah, I mean, we got a lot of old guys and a lot of young guys on a really, and I'm not saying this to be rude, but like on a bad offense on top of that, right?
Yeah. Is there 18 points a game?
So, yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like, who's this guy bringing with him, and what does it look like? It'd be a lot different. And obviously hindsight's 2020, but think about this, like he and Brian Dable were on a coaching staff together forever. Like obviously everybody knows now that would be fantastic, right? But who do these guys bring in? And I think, and that goes back to what we talked about with Peyton, right? Reality with Peyton was always that they know what you're getting with Peyton, and he's told you he's bringing
Vic Fangio.
So you know what you like. There's not any questions, and so that's that's what makes it. I don't want to say easy,
and it makes it super intriguing and desirable because what Peyton is able to do offensively, and Vic Fangio's defenses are fantastic. And schematically, in terms of player fit, you've got guys that kind of already fit what Vic would want to do.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think that's what makes it really, easy and something that you look at. But quite frankly, I just don't. Yeah, I'm kind of going back through these old Patriot staffs too. Like, there's not anything where you're just like, oh, this is the guy. Like O'Shea, I've never heard of him. He was fired after one season as the OC in Miami, and he's already 50. So like maybe a second time around, but I don't think that's going to necessarily, inflict confidence from the fans and everything. If you're like, yeah, this is who we're bringing in, right, to be the guy. Yeah, I mean, it's tough, man, and that's why I said it's part of what makes it interesting, right?
Yeah, lots to talk about over the next week or two, however long this hiring process is going to go, especially if it ends up being a guy who is in the playoffs. Coaching on a playoff team then becomes a little complicated because then you can't hire them until technically after they're until after they were eliminated. And the way, like, at least for D'Amico Ryans, and we didn't even talk about D'Amico Ryans, is he's been a stud in terms of defensive coordinator the last couple of years. He's a young up and comer. But again, the question is, what will you do offensively? Will he peel off from the Kyle Shanahan tree and kind of bring that Shanahan offense? So you basically extend the offensive scheme. The entire NFC West would be running kind of the same style offense as the Seahawks, 49ers, and Rams all run variations of kind of the same offense. Or would he go another route? Because D'Amico Ryans is he would change some of what the Cardinals do defensively. By all accounts, he is ready for the next. Like he's a hot shot when it comes to coaching, kind of like what Robert Saleh was. Only Ryans has been able to take what Saleh did and maintain and improve it even a little bit, to where he's now put himself in a position to coach. As a player, the type of player that he was as a heady linebacker. He mentored Jordan Hicks when Jordan Hicks was drafted, and was basically the Zaven Collins to basically was in the same scenario as a rookie that Zaven Collins was for Hicks, and Ryans embraced him completely. And so I think he's an intriguing fit, but then you also have to worry about, of course, who's he going to bring on to coach the offense, and how will that fit with what you want to do with Kyler Murray?
Yeah, and that's going to be the big thing, is who and where do you go? Let me ask you this, a couple names I just looked at. So O'Shea's mentioned a lot. What about Zach Robinson, the Rams quarterback coach?
I mean, everyone off of McVay's tree seem to be all right, right?
Yeah, I mean, he does, and he's an interesting.
But it would again keep that same offense in the entire NFC West.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it would. And yeah, so you look at, he's a young guy, passing game coordinator, quarterbacks coach, was the assistant quarterback coach last year. He's young, man. So I mean, he would get snapped up pretty quick. They mentioned Joe Judge. I thought Judge was a special teams guy.
He had done receivers as well, I believe.
Okay.
I think he was a receivers coach first, then coached special teams, and then got the gig in New York.
I was going to mention this guy again, just kind of going back through old Patriot staff or current Patriot staff. So their tight end coach, because I was like, oh, Brian Daboll was a tight end coach before he became an OC. Dude, I didn't realize Brian Daboll had been like an OC since like 2007 or 8. But like he just kept getting fired. Like he kept failing and then like getting fired and then going somewhere else and getting fired. So, so Joe Brady gets mentioned. He's the Bills quarterback coach. I like that. Let's see here. Zach Robinson. We talked about LaFleur. The hard part is you always want to try to like find a guy that fits with whoever the coach is, right? Like that they've worked together somewhere. And I know that there's so many guys that come and go in passing, but like it just makes it really hard to focus on that if you don't see them having worked together anywhere. Because like you said,
exactly, because that's where guys like Brian Flores and Frank Reich seem to be nicer fits, because they have relationships with coaches they could bring in, while it feels like unless you handpick, if you let them bring their own staff, it's going to be someone inexperienced. You're going to have an experienced head coach on top of an experienced coordinator.
Right. And then, how does that work? Like, who would be the guy that you would even bring in? So yeah, it's just interesting. Like I said, the Bill O'Brien one, it does make the most sense. Like Flores and him work together in New England. They, O'Brien's a former head coach. Like, he's a guy that a lot of people trust. It'll be interesting, man. I just, ugh.
that would be so polar opposite.
It would just be such
going from Kliff and Vance to Flores and O'Brien. Woof.
You're right, and it would be crazy. Like, dude, it would be so crazy to watch unfold. Like, legitimately watch.
Particularly how Kyler responds.
Right.
That's the thing, because of the kind of the notion that the reputation he has of being not coachable, to be then pushed by two hard-nosed coaches, old school coaches that will push and challenge. And even as Ryan Fitzpatrick said, Flores mishandled Tua, but maybe Tua didn't have the mental makeup that a guy like Flores wanted. Brian Fitzpatrick said that Flores will mentally challenge his quarterbacks, and that was tough for Tua. I don't think that'd be a problem for Kyler, is if he's in the right mindset. If he is the guy that I believe he is, and not what the narrative is about him, I believe he will respond and thrive in that sort of setting.
Let me throw a name at you that's interesting, and we can end on that. But what about and I don't think they've ever worked together, but like a Pep Hamilton, who's a well-respected guy that's worked with Andrew Luck, Justin Herbert. He's the Texans quarterback coach. You see what he did with Davis freaking Mills,
right?
Like, and like what he got out of Mills and his limited abilities. Like, and he's just a quarterback coach and passing game coordinator. Do you think that would be something that would be like? Again, I don't know if they have any overlap or any but like, again, I'm just trying to find names that would be interesting. The other one that would be interesting and it'd be crazy, but like, what about Nathaniel Hackett that just got fired?
Oh man, that would be such a hard sell, I think.
It would be, but like he's I mean, he worked wonders for Blake Bortles, and Aaron Rodgers loved him, so it'll be interesting, man. But Flores, if Flores is the guy, that'll be the big thing, because you look at what his defenses did, especially his second year in Miami. I mean, you're looking at it like 6 in points, number 1 in turnovers. Even his last year, still 16th, right in the middle in points, 8th in turnovers forced. That changed. He took over his first year. They were 32nd in points. 32nd. His second year, they were 6th. That's literally insane. Like, you talk about a defensive changing, like, that's insane. But all of a sudden, is that something? And in his last 2 years, they allowed 8 passing touchdowns. Like, they just it's just, or no, sorry, they allowed. Sorry, I was looking at it wrong. They were number 2 and number 6 in passing touchdowns allowed. Like, his defenses were legitimate at the end, but his offense is 15th his second year, and then it dropped back down to 22nd. Like, he had a really, really hard time with offense, and that's going to be the big thing, because whether it's Kyler, because that's the thing, is like, people are going to be like, oh, Kyler. Well, I mean, he didn't get along with Tua, who's supposed to be like the most docile and happy-go-lucky and easy to work with guy in the world, right? And he couldn't get along with him. So, like you said, I wouldn't not do it, if that makes sense, because it was because he had that run in. But at the same time, man, like, it's got to be, he's got to show something as this time as being able to maintain offensive coordinators and keep a coaching staff together over a period, because that's the thing is like, if a guy gets a second chance and makes the same mistakes, then that's who he was.
Yeah. And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. This is episode 390. We will be back again next week. I'm sure there will be more coaching talk. If they hired a new head coach.
I was going to say, do you think they're going to hire somebody in the next week?
It's going to be hard, but we'll either have updates on the coaching situation, we can talk roster, or we'll have a hired. I mean, I guess it depends on who their target is, because basically it comes down to, if it's D'Amico Ryans, they've got to wait. Everyone else is on the table.
Right, exactly.
And so that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Rule. We'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening as always. Go Cardinals.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.
Roll!